Okay, I think we can start. We have a bit of a sizable amount of attendees who have joined. So I think we can start and hopefully the rest will join in not too far from here. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very important discussion, which is being facilitated by the Business and Human Rights Resource Center and the Asina Loyiko Campaign. My name is Mensen Gwanyanya. I've been tasked with moderating this very important discussion. I really don't have, we really have a packed event, so I don't want to take too much time because part of the speakers that are going to speak will really speak to the issues of why we are here. I just really want to welcome everyone, and just a few ground rules. We have the chat box where attendees can post questions and answers if they wish. We are going to have a session of about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of the, after each speaker speaks, for colleagues to ask questions. Hopefully we can have a discussion happening. But yeah, I really want to hand over now to Hassan, who sort of introduced the topic why we are here, and also just welcome everyone. Over to you, Hassan.
Good afternoon, friends and comrades. We've been struggling for a while to get this going, and I'm glad to say that we have managed eventually to get a team of us working together. Now, I'm attached to the Benchmarks Foundation, and it's one of the party organizations here. And as I will tell you, but my task is really a simple one, is to invite you to join us in the struggle that I will explain. And I wanted to show my face, but I must give me some access there. You know, I want to touch a little bit on how law has been used against people under colonialism, under the worst stages of imperialism, as a tool to subjugate people, right? You can go as far back as the Berlin Conference in 1884, where the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck gathered some of his other European friends, and they decided to carve Africa out among themselves. They made that legal. It was lawful to screw the poor, to divide the country, to take their resources. The initial task of the conference was to agree that the Congo Basin and the Niger River, Mouth's basins, would be considered neutral and open to trade. Of course, not for inter-African trade that we need to talk about, but for the powerful to use as they see fit. And law was so closely tied to might, right? Now, what we are trying to demonstrate here is a particular growth in our own organizational development, where we're pulling our resources and we're trying to learn the trades of those who've exploited us and turn it on its head. We are using the law and our organized power. We're using our spirituality. We're using our ancient knowledge. We're using our collective political struggles to challenge those who have abused us for a while, over the centuries and even more recently. Now, the more recent history of this SLAP suit, which is basically a strategic legal attack against us to stop us from speaking to power. You know? So I volunteered to help Sarwatch when they were confronted by a Canadian transnational corporation called First Quantum Mining. They took out a strategic lawsuit to shut up the leaders, Claude, Edward in the field, and try to marginalize the community for seeking to work with a civic body that wanted to hear their story about how corporations populate us with rubbish. They pollute our air supplies, they pollute our water supplies. And when we dare to say this to them, they begin to attack us. So they tie our hands when we try to speak truth to power. strategic lawsuits against public participation is what we say is a slap suit. So Sarwatch went to their lawyers to get some help. They're using Richards IV Incorporated, and they joined in with other civil society groups to make this fight a political fight, which it is. The Center for Environmental Rights has been spearheading Asina Loyiko, and they opened their arms to groups that have been fighting like that. Over the past few years, they've already helped communities. They were tackling an Australian transnational corporation, Mineral Sands Resources. And those guys typically attacked the lawyers and attacked the activists. And we should name them. They attacked Christine Reddell and Tracy Davis, who were then working for CER. They attacked Devine Kluter, right? And also later on, they made sure they give a tough time to other activists working in the Kolobeni region. We all remember how Bazooka Khadebe was killed, and to date, his killers have not been found. He was killed, and his community leaders and others, the community where he comes from, remain terrorized by this powerful. So these people are humans like us. We also remember the Tsomkele environmental activist, Fikile Ntangaze, was also killed. Now, the law has been used against poor people for a long time, but it has been, in our recent history, post-94, and even against apartheid, been used as a tool for liberation as well. But it can only be used for liberation if it is close to the people that it seeks to represent. This is why Asina Loyiko has been launched, so that it can serve to provide support for those who are being bullied by corporations, and also take on governments that are seemingly complicit. We had major victory recently in 2021 in February, where CER and its partners found a favorable ruling, and Judge Patricia Goliath said that what these communities are facing, right, was a slap suit, right? In instances, and I quote her, where corporations could be the main cause of damaging and destructive behavior of the environment and biodiversity, civil society should be allowed to confront and restrain such behavior. So Goliath stood on the side of those of us with the slingshots. What we need to do now is to build on the ground to make sure that these groups, right, Sarwatch, Benchmarks Foundation, Center for Applied Legal Studies, the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, and I mentioned Sarwatch CALS, Center for Applied Legal Studies, all of us working together around Asina Loyiko can make it both a mass-supported instrument, a mass-supported forum and structure that can support the poor. We know that slap suits are universally a weapon of the powerful, right? And one of our partners here, Business and Human Rights Resource Center, also a partner that I didn't mention, they have found in their studies that 355 cases bear
Hassan, we seem to have lost you.
Africa, and South Africa being one of the most impacted upon. Did you lose me when yeah, can I just repeat that? I said that Business and Human Rights Resource Center in their study found that 355 cases since 2015 have been slaps in Africa, and that is a marked increase of about close to 10%. So Africa has not been spared. What we want to do here, in the memory of those who've been attacked and those who've been killed, to double our effort so that we can build a society of compassion, so that when we open the society of compassion, we'll even invite the bosses to throw away their arrogance and join us, because the winner takes all in our society has never the rules of Africans has been. So we welcome you all for this webinar and say thank you for making the time. The journey will be long, there will be casualties, but in the interest of Mshangaze and Hadebe and others who've been attacked, please join us in this noble cause. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for that somewhat sad but very important historical account. And I think it will also, I mean, what our next speaker, really, Tammy, is also just going to give some context in the Tammy works with the Right to Know campaign, and he's just going to briefly give us some form of, I mean, an explanation of what is the Asina Loyiko campaign is all about. I'm sure he also discussed some of the members of that Asina Loyiko campaign. So let me not take too much of your time. Tammy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Manson, and thank you to Hassan for a very broad background on the historical context in which we find ourselves in, at least currently, to say these are all connected. Nothing just happens. We have a history of kind of lawfare being used, particularly against those who sought dissent and those who are challenging the status quo. Perhaps just to take a step back and perhaps, you know, to say welcome to everybody who's joined us today. We're grateful for making this moment to be with us. But just to take a step back, what is the Asina Loyiko campaign? Well, the Asina Loyiko campaign was established in 2019 as a response to, you know, mostly the legal harassment of activists, mostly by corporations, as Hassan had alluded to. But I think perhaps just to say that the important part of it is to say, this then stifles the activities within the communities to mobilize, intimidate communities from organizing themselves and actually going up against what they believe would be unfair harassment of these big conglomerates that come into our communities. It started basically to protect mostly the environmental rights activists, and as a result, there was a need to then therefore say, what can we do in order to be able to counter some of the actions that are committed by all these conglomerates? And as a result, as you know, Comrade Hassan had just painted the picture as well. Not only is there harassment, sometimes it's at the loss of life. Comrade Hassan has also mentioned a few of our comrades that had been killed for opposing some of these mining conglomerate activities as well. So not only is it physical threats, it's also the threats and people lose their lives. And sometimes you think about this situation, for instance, in the Northwest, where the Teresa mine is actually interdicting all the time and perhaps isolating some of the leadership of the Marikana youth who are constantly trying to engage with the mine to talk about issues of development and how they're actually messing up the environment. Teresa mine will always take interdicts against these activists and seek to isolate particularly the leadership of the Marikana youth from actively partaking on this. So not only is it about harassment, it's also about trampling on the right to protest, the right to assemble, the right to protest, the right to petition. That too, we see it being under threat by these huge conglomerates. So as a result, that's the reason why the Asina Loyiko campaign was formed as a response to say, what can we collectively do as a civil society to ensure some level of protection, to ensure some legal protection of some of the activists and some of the leading figures within the movement, environmental movements and other spheres as well, that are actually pushing back against capitalism and corporations that are essentially wanting to devastate our environment. So as a result, Asina Loyiko was formed in 2019. I remember vividly, coincidentally, it's April 2021, April 2020, on the 21st last year, we've officially launched the website. So it's befitting that we're having this conversation once again in October, which I think is it's a beautiful milestone, which means it's almost a 2-year anniversary of the Asina Loyiko, which is beautiful. So what do we seek to do as the Asina Loyiko comrades? What we're trying to do in truth is just to prevent and discourage companies from operating in Southern Africa, from using strategic litigation to silence activists, in particular bringing SLAP suits to ensure that they silence all the activists that are rising up, particularly against the mining giants. The second reason for us was to raise awareness of the slap suits. So not only are we saying we're going to try and discourage companies and perhaps prevent companies from using slap suits, what we also thought was to say, how do we raise awareness? How do we generate information? How do we do popular outreach to these communities in order to strengthen their resolve, in order for them to be armed with at least some knowledge of how they can go about navigating, dealing with these companies as well. And then the third reason was to basically just build a solidarity network. Let's build a solidarity network where we'll be able to exchange knowledge, exchange expertise, and be able to support particularly grassroots activists at the level which, the big conglomerates are assuming that these are, illiterate people who may not have the information. So not only do we want to capacitate our comrades, not only do we want to support them, but we also want to walk the path with them in solidarity with them. So we formed ourselves into an alliance that would be looking out to try and assist particularly grassroots movements and other civil society organizations as well. So what we have done since 2020, after the launch of the website, what we essentially did was just to kind of feed information into the website, to kind of give people some knowledge of what are slap suits, what form do they take, what shape and form do they take perhaps, and some resources as well to say, what can you do, where can you go, and how you can access help as well. So the website is very useful insofar as trying to build in the knowledge base as well, to try and bring in the information, to give different examples of what is happening globally so that we understand that this is a global phenomenon. It's not unique to Southern Africa, and also trying to build networks across the globe to strengthen the resolve of civil society organizations and grassroots organizations to try and actually push back against this corporate tyranny, because that's really what it is. It's corporate tyranny. And what we have done so far is to establish at least what we call a working group. So the working group that we have right now sits together with the terms of reference to specifically try and build a body of work that we can be able and become a resource, particularly for activists on the ground, for people on the ground who may need assistance with regards to understanding slap suits. And perhaps we, at some point we think about doing some outreach and going out in communities and having conversations with communities to say, we should not be bullied by mining companies. We should not be bullied by these large corporations. And this is what we can do together and build that resource. So as we're able to move together with the people, not only us as a civil society, structure, but also with the people as well. How do we move forward? So we formed what we call a working group that comprises of the Benchmarks Foundation, the Center for Applied Legal Studies, and the Right to Protest Network as well, because earlier on, as I'd mentioned, that even the right to protest is actually being stifled under these circumstances. And we have the Center for Environmental Rights, of course, and then we have the Right to Know campaign. We have the Southern African Resource Watch, and we have Women and Amatiba Crisis as well. So we have a very large group of civil society organizations that are essentially willing to do the work and try and build a resolve and build a resource so that we can be able to push back against such corporate tyranny as well. I think, maybe perhaps just to checking at the time, perhaps just to say, we meet on a regular base, and we have roles and responsibilities that are tasked to each member there. We rotate our chairing of the meeting. We bring in the information. The website also allows grassroots organizations to actually register any slap suit that may come against them, so that we can try and see if we can find a way to actually assist them. And we're a group that's kind of really willing to put together, roll up our sleeves and build this network, and hopefully, broaden the scope as well, and build networks outside of South Africa, because this is a global struggle, and eventually perhaps, have a global pushback against corporate tyranny that is essentially terrorizing communities everywhere in the world. And with that said, perhaps I'll leave it here. If there's anything that I had left out, perhaps it will come out in the question and answer session. But thank you so much, Manson, for the moment.
Thank you very much, Tammy. Thank you very much. Indeed, this is a global struggle. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone here when I say that the importance of platforms like the Asina Loyiko Campaign can never be underestimated. I'm pretty sure that quite a number of activists have found voice within the campaign, and that you are doing fantastic work. I have a few questions, but I think they will probably come up in the discussion. So let me not raise them now and abuse my position. But our next speaker is my colleague at the Resource Center, Lady Nancy. She is one of our leading researchers of the report. That really partly is part of the discussion that we are here today, slapped but not silenced. And she will really just give us a global perspective on how SLAPP suits are used by corporations to silence defenders. I really don't want to go into more detail. I'll just stop here and hand it over to you, lady. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manson, and thank you very much, Hassan, and for this great introduction and sharing more about the Asina Loyiko campaign. I will just take some minutes to share a bit more about our SLAPP's work at the Resource Center. The first thing to mention is that since 2015, the Resource Center has tracked more than 3,500 attacks against human rights defenders who focus on business-related activities. And in that context, we identify SLAPPs as one of the attack commonly used by corporations to silence and intimidate defenders. And we also hear from different partners in the field and different organizations that this was one of the most common tactics used by different companies around the world. And in 2019, we started conducting deep research on the use of SLAPPs at the global level. And after 2 years of research, we released this year in June the first ever global report on the use of SLAPPs. And I will just share a bit more about this report that we released along with a database, a global database with more than 300 cases. I will just give me just a second and I will maybe try to use this. Yes, so here, so as I mentioned, in June this year, we released our global report that is called SLAPPs but not silence, defending human rights in the face of legal risk. In this report, we identify more than 355 cases around the world. Those cases bear the hallmarks of SLAPPs, and just to give you a bit more background in this research, we cover just lawsuits, criminal or civil lawsuits that were initiated by corporations or business persons related to specific corporations. And in this analysis, we just went through different criteria and we identified that more than 224 cases involve criminal charges. And this is very important because if we just think that SLAPPs, like the initial research on SLAPPs was from the global north, in Canada and US, many of the cases were just related to civil lawsuits. But in our research, we also decided to include criminal charges because in many regions, this is what corporations are using more. And in our data, this is what we identified. But we also identified that more than 106 cases were related to civil complaints. And there are some that are just a mix between criminal and civil complaints. And it's very important to have this in mind because when we think about potential recommendations to fight back SLAPPs, we also see that it's important to make some legal reforms, mainly in cases, for instance, that are related to criminal charges, and many of these criminal charges include long prison sentences. And the most common legal arguments by corporations are like defamation and libel, because in many of the countries, at least in the global south, these kind of legal arguments are still under criminal law. But also we identify that incitement to commit crime and damages are also part of the trend when corporations are trying to use the criminal law to silence the defender. In our research, something that really come up with was the different regions and how one of the most region affected is Latin America, and then followed by Asia and Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, and North America, and then Africa. But it's so important to have in mind that our research was based on online research, doing desk research, going through different sources, analyzing different articles, report. And we know that in many of the regions, SLAP is not under the agenda, or organizations are not calling the different legal attacks as SLAP. So this is very important to have in mind. And also, we also identify that people are afraid to call the cases as SLAP, or they don't want to bring attention to their cases. And this is why we recognize that although we identify those specific trends in the regions, it might be possible that the numbers are even higher because of the lack of awareness of the topic, but also in many regions, people are not reporting the cases as a SLAP. Other important aspect we identify in the global level, it's related to the the type of corporations or the sector that are most commonly use SLAPs. So one of the sectors commonly using this tactic are the mining, then followed by agriculture and livestock, and logging and lumber. But we also see that it's not easy to make this analysis because companies could belong to different sectors. For instance, in a region could do like mining, but in another one could be like agriculture and livestock. And the sectors that we identify here are the ones that are related to the context or to the specific case, like the activity that the company was doing in that specific country or in that specific, or that is related to the specific case. The other important thing to mention is that in all of the regions, we identify that this is a really powerful attack, unfortunately, to silence the defenders and to just violate different human rights, the rights of freedom of expression, association. And in some cases, people can even argue that there is a violation of the personal integrity because there is a huge impact on the defenders' work. There is a huge financial and psychological impact, and this is what we also see in many of our cases. The other important thing to have in mind is that SLAPs can take years in the courts, and this is why we really need to increase solidarity with those organizations and defenders who are facing SLAPs, because in many regions, for instance, in Peru or in many cases in Latin America, people can wait 10 years, 15 years just to hear their sentences just in the first instance. So we see that SLAPs drain the resources of the defenders, drain the resources of the different organizations, and even can bankrupt the organizations, or they just can be afraid to continue working on human rights issues. The other, will just to try to close, the other important aspect that we identify in our research is the role of the law firms, the role of the lawyers that are supporting corporations to to bring the cases against the defenders. And this is also, we consider that it's important to not only continue raising awareness about this topic, but also to continue working closely with different lawyers or bar associations to try to build like networks or to build connections, so they can just refrain to use slaps, or they can just avoid using slaps against the organizations and defenders. So maybe we will have more time to discuss some of our recommendations, but in our report, we also provide recommendations to different stakeholders, but we focus on investors, companies, but we also provide some recommendations to governments and bar associations. And one of the most important recommendations, at least from the investors and company perspective, is that they should commit to a clear policy of non-retaliation against defenders. So our focus is on slaps, but also we recognize that when organizations or defenders are facing slaps, they can also be targeted with other type of attacks, for instance, smear campaigns, or even like other form of threat. So we just call to implement this zero tolerance approach on reprisals against defenders during the operations, and also avoid investing in companies that has a history of using slaps. So I will just stop here. I also wanted to acknowledge that apart from this report that we released this year, we have also released other reports in other regions, particularly in Asia. I will share all of the links to our report in our chat function. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Lady. I'm aware that the report is actually much longer than that, but we don't have time. Someone asked in the chat box if there's a link, and I see a number of colleagues have already sent the link. So if you really want to get more information on that report, please just have a look at the links that have been put inside the chat box. Also, just a reminder that if you have any questions, you can also just put them in the chat box. In the meantime, we will have a discussion at the end of this session. But yeah, it's also helpful if you could just put them in the chat box, so that our speakers can sort of try and identify them earlier on. So we have heard from Lady on the global perspective. Our next speaker is Martin from Sarwatch, and really Sarwatch has been one of the victims of slap suits. I think some of you might be aware that a company called First Quantum Minerals, which really operates mostly in Zambia, I think, has taken Sarwatch to court on a report that it had released. And from my understanding, they tried to give them an opportunity to comment, but they refused. And now they are saying that Sarwatch has defamed them to a certain extent. So I won't go into much more details, except to let Martin share that experience with us. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you so much, Manson. Good afternoon to everyone joining us today. Thank you so much for, making the time to be with us. We understand that it's quite a very busy time at the end of the year, but we appreciate the audience that we have here. Briefly, I'll just start my presentation with just give me a minute. I'm trying to just share my presentation. All right. So the presentation is going to focus primarily on slap suits in Africa. I think one would ask, what constitutes a slap suit? It refers to litigation that has no merit, that is exaggerated, and intends to intimidate and silence civil society advocates, human rights defenders, journalists, academics, individuals, organizations, and general people acting in public interest. How SLAPP suits generally originate is that you have mining companies, you have civil society organizations, you have activists, you have communities, and these different role players all have a role that they play in the mining sector. Most of the time, communities in mining are often disregarded, are often their rights not given, their rights not adhered to and protected, and at times their rights are violated. The communities are displaced, and often are without any left without any resource and recourse. Civil society plays a critical watchdog over mining activities and sort of fills in the gap that government is not feeling of exercising oversight over mining activities to ensure that mining activities don't bring any harm to the environment, to damage access to clean water and people's health. And as such, most of the time, because of this work that civil society is doing, because of the work that communities are doing in resisting mining operations, the companies then find a way to push back and silence these people that are speaking out against mining activities and how harmful the mining operations are, and that they're having communities and the environment. And often mining activities, I think, throughout the African continent are done in a way that there's lack of proper consultation with communities, and communities are often sidelined, and civil society is also equally sidelined in mining operations. Mining activities also results in quite severe human rights and environmental rights violations. Government most of the time doesn't exercise the necessary oversight that it should exercise over mining activities. Mining companies also have a derelict their duty towards communities and in implementing corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment initiatives. Essentially, this is how we would typically get to a SLAPP suit. There would be lack of oversight from government, monitoring of, there would be little CSI and corporate social responsibility, labor issues, community dissatisfaction, pushback from mining from communities against mining activities, independent reports about the mining activities by organizations such as SARA, the Center for Environmental Rights, and other organizations that exercise watchdog oversight in mining activities. The response mostly from mining companies when these reports are published or when communities push back and speak out against mining activities is to intimidate the communities, is to intimidate the civil society organization into silence, and so that nobody speaks up against the effects of the negative impacts of mining. And mostly this response we've seen in our context is that it's a SLAPP suit, which the company would institute, suing the company, suing the organization, suing individual activists for large amounts of money to ensure that in itself make on the organization, on the activists who ultimately withdraw the report that they would have, or ultimately change their stance on the issues that they would have identified that are perpetrated by the particular mining company. I think, and I think the case that we have against First Quantum Minerals is a clear example of this issue. In this case, where Sarah is being sued by First Quantum Minerals, a Canadian mining company, for 1 billion rand, it's suing the executive director of the organization, the programs officer based in Zambia, and the organization for a million South African rands. And this emanates from a report that SARA, in collaboration with Zambian civil society, produced. SARA and the Zambian civil society organizations had been monitoring the corporate social responsibility of First Quantum mining in the Soliti district in the northwestern province of Zambia, and had found in this report, which is titled "Living in a Parallel Universe: First Quantum versus Communities," it had found that First Quantum was not fulfilling its corporate social responsibilities to communities, or the social corporate responsibilities activities that they had undertaken were not of great value, and were of very low quality. For example, the schools that they would have built would be a school that would have only one tap or one bathroom, which was obviously inadequate to support the number of learners in the classroom. And that was, I think, some of the issues that were in the report. Ultimately, First Quantum took issues with the findings of the report and demanded that SARA withdraws the report. We obviously stand by the report even now. And then the refusal to withdraw the report led to First Quantum issuing summons earlier this year in March from the Johannesburg High Court, basically suing SARA for saying that the allegations in the report are defamatory, and the allegations also are false. And obviously, this is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. We file summons. In the summons, obviously, we speak about how the lawsuit against SARA as a SLAP suit, and the court should see it as a SLAP suit against proper public interest. I think since filing the summons, which is our defense, the attorneys for First Quantum have not filed any replication, have not said anything about whether they still intend to pursue the litigation. So it's a waiting game to see whether they still intend to pursue the litigation against SARA and two of its staff members. The other case of, I think, a SLAP suit that I would want to highlight quickly, if I still have time, is a global witness case against Dan Gatla. So Dan Gatla is a very prominent global witness, published an investigative report on the controversial mining magnate Dan Gatla. Which, sorry.
If you can wrap up in a minute, Martin. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So they had done this investigation to see the investigation had alleged corruptions and proper shifting of funds from the DRC mining sector to America through a web of multiple companies. And I think the important part is that before the report was published by Global Witness, these are some of the attempts that this man Dan Gatla and other parties implicated in the report undertook to try and silence Global Witness. There was a stream of local media posts making splashing remarks about Global Witness, its staff, and there was investigations into some of its staff members, past and present, and there were things published about them that were personal attacks on the integrity. They also filed a criminal complaint against Global Witness and platform protection of whistleblowers in France. And all of this was to try to divert attention from the report. Even after the publication of the report, they still continued with the intimidation tactics. The intimidation tactics included strings of accusations against Global Witness and its partners. It also included well-coordinated and crafted social media videos that also went again to attack Global Witness. There were false allegations against the staff members, the organization, its funders, and they also accused Global Witness in the media of manipulating the Congolese civil society organizations and its allies. And I think just to wrap up, this is some of the tactics that are undertaken by mining companies to ensure that they silence valid criticism against their operations, and I think the harm that they're doing to the environment. I think we've already discussed the mineral sands matter, so I'll just skip that slide and come to the conclusion. Yes, I think from our end, I think that's as part of the SLAP suit against us, and just generally on our broader work at SARA, we will continue to support communities and civil society organizations, activists in opposing impunity in the SADC region and in Africa. Thank you, Manson. I'll stop here for now.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Martin. Indeed, so I just wanted to quickly highlight, even from the report that we commissioned at the Resource Center, mining companies, I think, were the top or the biggest culprits when it comes to SLAP suits. I've just shared a link also in the chat box that sometimes it's also companies in certain industries, not necessarily mining, that are also found guilty of attacking activists in terms of using SLAPs. But I just want to also quickly introduce, we are running slightly behind time. So I want to quickly introduce our next speaker, who is from the Center of Applied Legal Studies, Busi, who is also just going to give us very briefly, Busi, if you can, just a background on some of the cases that they've came across at the Legal Resources Center. Thank you, Busi, over to you.
Thank you, Manson, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. Good afternoon, colleagues and comrades. Really an interesting discussion that we've been having, and I think my fellow panelists have already covered quite a lot and very rich information that's coming out from that. So let me limit my intervention rather to talking a little bit about some of the work that organizations such as the Center for Applied Legal Studies has been involved in to try to combat and, in my view, try to also eradicate the phenomena of SLAP suits in South Africa. So CALS first worked around SLAP suits, or rather more in depth around SLAP suit around 2017, where we conducted a report on trying to find out some of the victimization experiences of activists in South Africa. And so in that report, we then also realized that one of the key ways in which activists were being victimized was through the use of law against them. And so we reported on this, and like Lady had mentioned earlier on, we also saw that there is the use of criminal proceedings as well as civil proceedings against activists to abuse, to victimize, to silence, etc. And so we really then started using this report as a basis to try to find ways to use the law in another way, right? To protect activists when they have to get to court, etc., facing all sorts of victimization that usually comes up in this way. And so what then we started doing as an organization is sort of adopting this two-pronged approach to trying to intervene in anti-SLAP work or doing our anti-SLAP work. The first one is sort of in a case-by-case basis intervention. And then secondly, trying to eradicate SLAP suits on a more structural level. So when we talk about the case-by-case basis, what we've been doing is taking on cases where activists find themselves facing SLAP suits, right? And so we would come in, our excellent team of litigators would then come in and represent the different activists and then try to make arguments before the court to get SLAP suits to be recognized. So initially this was also also the strategy, because in South Africa, slap suits were not necessarily recognized within the jurisprudence. However, it was important to get it recognized so that if you are an activist and you are faced with, a slap suit, it's easier to raise that defense because it's something that courts have already recognized, and it's something that that courts are alive to in South Africa. And so on the case-by-case basis, the strategy was then to get it within South African jurisprudence. And, as some of the panelists have mentioned, the mineral sands resource case where our colleagues at CER were being sued, and the Center for Applied Legal Studies then also came in as amicus curiae, using that report to also show that slap suits is something that is happening in South Africa. It is something that activists are facing, and there should be a way for people that are victimized through slap suits to be able to raise this as a defense. We all know how that ended, a fantastic judgment where that was then recognized in South Africa. And this was important because it also allows other courts and different courts to take judicial notice of this, and then also be able to apply the same principle and the same concepts in different courts around the country. But of course, a case-by-case basis helps, because then the activist at that instance can, make raise this defense of slap suits, etc. But a case-by-case basis takes a long time, right? And so on a more structural level, what we've been trying to do is to also have legislation that particularly deals with slap suits. Now, if we have legislation, anti-slap legislation in South Africa, what it does is that there's a standard way in which slap suits would have to be dealt with across the country, right? And at the same time, it allows for courts to have a sort of guide on what needs to happen when somebody raises this defense of a slap suit, have it recognized, and also know what to do with it. Some of the stuff that we've seen in our case-by-case interventions is that we had a case where the court avoided dealing with the issue of slap suit, despite making arguments around why that amounted to a slap suit, etc. In the judgment, nothing was said about it. And so having anti-slap legislation would also assist the court and a judge that appears in a matter where an allegation is made that it amounts to a slap suit, for the judge to know exactly how do you deal with it in that instance and what needs to happen in that case. To get us to a place where it is not random, where maybe slap suits are ignored, or where the courts and litigants, etc., don't know how to deal with this issue. But Parliament then can create standardized rules on how to deal with this. And so we're really working on getting advocacy around this, on the importance of having anti-slap legislation, on the importance of Parliament actually taking steps to have this enacted, and then also, of course, to try to draft some sort of a model law that would really recommend what are some of the things that should be there in an anti-slap legislation. How are the protections supposed to work? What are some of the key issues that activists are facing, right? And how do we protect activists when faced with these key issues? At the same time, we are cognizant that, we all have a right of access to courts. And so how does the balancing happen of accessing to courts against not abusing court processes for the purpose of silencing and for the purpose of, preventing people from really participating the way that they should be, or the way that everybody has a democratic right to, right? Including being able to dissent to power. And so, these and some of our other interventions, I think, have become really important. And together working with Asina Loyiko, I think it results in this collective effort towards addressing one common problem. And I truly believe that, slap suits is something that should be eradicated completely in South Africa, across the globe, actually, because there shouldn't be space in which law can be used for the sole purpose of victimizing people. There shouldn't be a space where law can be weaponized against, activists, etc. And so I think some of these efforts that are coordinated with other organizations, some of these efforts will also allow activists to know where to go, right? And activists to be able to have information and coordinated information on what to do should they find themselves in that situation, how to be proactive as well, to protect themselves, to raise awareness about this in different regions across the continent, across the globe even, and also solidarity, as Tammy had mentioned as well, and really to be able to get that panel of attorneys should the need arise, or a group of attorneys that would be willing to assess each case and be able to help activists should the need arise as well. And so really, I think if we can continue to take on this important work, continue to move forward in this fight, it's really quite an important one, and one that I really believe that we can win, and we can win it in our lifetime. Let me leave it there for now. Thanks, Manson.
Thank you very much. I'm indebted to you. That was indeed brief. Let me now introduce our last speaker before we head into the discussion. Leanne from the Center of Applied Legal Studies, which I would say really has been the driver, I think, in my view, of this campaign, as far as personally I came aware of it. And Leanne is just really going to share some lessons on how they've coordinated the legal defense on slave suits. Over to you, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Manson. So I'm joining you from the Center for Environmental Rights, and I think colleagues have covered so much of what I wanted to reflect on today in respect of the strategies, the approaches that we're adopting in respect of addressing SLAPP suits. So I'm really just going to take a complete step back and kind of run through some of those strategies with emphasis at the end of my my presentation on the SLAPP suit judgment that has been referred to as the Goliath judgment during our conversation. So I think the first thing to emphasize here is that SLAPP suits form part of a broader systematic approach and attack by corporations against activists. The most urgent and repressive part of that attack is a physical attack. It is the attack that results in the physical intimidation of activists. It's the one part of their approach that has even resulted in comrades being killed across the country. And it is so important to start off by saying that a civil society is part of the Asina Loyiko Campaign, civil society more generally. It's important for us to address that first line of attack. So being able to address the physical attacks against activists across the country and in the region is crucially important. The Southern African Human Rights Defenders Network plays a crucial role in being able to address these attacks, move activists and defenders where necessary, and ensure that in the first place, they are protected, or there are mechanisms in place to protect them. In the second instance, you would find then different types of legal harassment. Tommy has mentioned interdicts by various corporations. You have legal harassment in the form of SLAPP suits. And there are various other ways in which corporations use the law to then intimidate and repress the activities of activists around the country and in the region. Our work in looking at how do you ensure that SLAPP suits in particular as a form of legal harassment is addressed in a way that allows for those working on environmental and human rights issues continue with their important public interest work across the country. Well, it's important to first have a campaign like ours, the Asina Loyiko Campaign, where corporations have now more power even than some governments and states do. How do activists really stand up against that kind of power? How do you leverage social media? How do you leverage communications platforms to be able to really stand up to that kind of power? And to some extent, we certainly hope within and as part of the working group for the Asina Loyiko Campaign that we're able to do some of that work, that we're able to stand up to really powerful corporations, question them, ask for transparency, and be able to spread information on how to counteract SLAPP suits. The essential strategy there being solidarity, as so many people have spoken about, real solidarity, real support for one another, sharing of information and resources on SLAPP suits, including on cases that are ongoing. This is a crucial aspect that the Center for Environmental Rights has focused on, is how do you ensure that legal resources in the form of information, as well as information on who are the attorneys and the advocates that are quite skilled and have the capacity in respect of being able to represent activists, organizations like Sarwatch or the CER in defending the SLAPP suit. So, you know, we have a list of lawyers and advocates who are quite skilled in media law, and we share that with activists that are facing SLAPP suits. This has proven particularly useful because oftentimes you have to act quite quickly, you have to brief attorneys and counsel quite quickly, and that has happened in respect of how we have been able to assist various organizations in finding legal assistance. And we've also been able to coordinate the legal defense of the particular SLAPP suit that former CER lawyers were facing. And that is the SLAPP suit brought by Mineral Sands Resources. What's so important about that judgment, and I want to post the link to it in the chat again, is that it recognized SLAPP suits as an abuse of process, as a vexatious piece of litigation. And what we have seen since this judgment was handed down in February this year is that it has been referenced as a defense in 2 SLAPP suits since then. In the Sarwatch case, which has been brought in the South Gauteng High Court, and then in the SLAPP case that has been brought against the Greater Kailami Conservancy. In both these instances, this particular judgment and the findings in this judgment have been referenced. Moreover, courts have already recognized this particular defense in existing kind of judgments. So in a recent case where a former CEO of Eskom kind of brought a SLAPP suit against an individual who made certain comments about him, the court specifically referenced this judgment in coming to the conclusion that this was indeed a SLAPP suit. It bore the hallmarks of a SLAPP suit. And I think we need to consider this as we embark on our regional collaboration. How do we develop out this jurisprudence? How do we share this information? How do we share information about raising the special pleas in a particular way so that it is as effective as possible? So I really wanted to kind of emphasize the role of that judgment and the immense role played by pro bono lawyers across this country in being able to represent clients in these kinds of cases. I want to conclude by just reflecting a little bit on international solidarity. Now, we're working here today with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, a key partner in the Asina Loyiko Campaign. They're doing work across the world. We work with other organizations as part of this partnership, and it is so important that we are able to have this international solidarity and engage in this way so that we do feel protected. As activists working on environmental and human rights issues, we feel protected in the broader landscape, in the broader activism around SLAPP suits and the protection of activists. I really want to kind of end the presentation there and be able to engage with all of you. I know there are questions, and importantly, I want to kind of leave with us this question of how do we engage our work in the region, on the continent? What are the things that we need to be doing to replicate the Asina Loyiko campaign on a regional and even a continental level? There are so many colleagues joining us from different parts of the continent here. How would we be able to really amplify this work? Thanks, Manson.
Wow, thank you very much, Leanne. That was very, very informative, and I really like your parting shot. How do we identify regional partners? And this is probably my favorite part of the whole program, where we then get to hear views from the other people who are not necessarily the panelists or the attendees. So this is now the time for a discussion. You can, I hope you can assist me, Leanne. I'm sure most of the speakers would have been, most of the attendees would have been muted. So can I assume that once I pick on someone, you'll be able to unmute? Okay, thanks, Leanne. I have a question from John Clark. John, please just briefly introduce yourself and ask your question and who it's directed to.
Yeah, it's a comment. I just wanting to thank Leanne and everybody for keeping this pot boiling. I'm one of the others in the kind of the MRC campaign, and I'm really grateful that CR have fronted it, because I'm a social worker working in basically human rights support, and it's very uncomfortable to have become a story. And it was so nice that the mining company actually sued everybody else so that we could form a bit of a collective and actually then not see this as being an individual, because that's part of what they want to do, is actually isolate and individualize it. But the point I want to make is that what it's also done is now empowered me to now work with whistleblowers. And I already think there's a huge strategic connection. What's this? Joan as a panelist. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Sorry. What? Oh, sorry. I'm back in a different guise. Okay. There's a huge potential strategic connection in bringing whistleblowers together. I've now got about a dozen clients in my social work practice who have been mercilessly persecuted for testifying at the Zonda Commission. I mean, even charged for that. And, we say, well, how do we actually kind of, roll back this mudslide? And there's a number of things you do. And I just want to see a close collaboration between us, because I think, with unity, with a collective, there's a huge latent power when there is collaboration and solidarity. At the same time, I'm now experiencing, that's when we have to be very careful, because it's an unstoppable force when civil society comes together, works together, and then they have no defense against it. So what do? They go and attack. And I mean, Thabisa Zulu was arrested last week. His phone was confiscated by the police. We've had Babita Deokaran killed. My whistleblower clients, some of them now looking to go to safe houses, because they suddenly realize that Zonda has given a platform for whistleblowers to come together. And it's very important, I think, that ultimately, as we roll out and we have new legislation, environmental offenses are going to be increasingly more important to blow the whistle on. So I think that there's an opportunity inherent in that. And I just want to say again, thank you, Leanne, and all of you for taking this initiative. It makes us feel like, we're not alone.
Thank you very much, John. I don't see any other hands. Do we have any other questions? I mean, in the chat box, there was one for Martin. He was just asking if you could share the slides. I think that's also John. I hope you saw that. And then there was a question on why we can't lobby for the Protected Disclosure Act to include SLAPs as a defense. I don't know if anyone is willing to take that. I'm personally, this is the first time I'm hearing about that act. I don't know if anyone amongst the panelists wants to take that question.
Manson, I think also Dr. Barnwell had a question about the psychological impacts of SLAP suits, and Martin, being from Sarwatch, facing these SLAP suits, working with communities in Zambia, may have a particular view on what are the psychological impacts, and perhaps even how does Asina Loyiko assist in being able to address those?
Yes, thank you, Dan. Martin?
Thank you, Lynn and Manson. I won't even lie. Like I think it's quite terrifying having this big amount of money hanging on your back. I think it obviously internally, even like just in general, it has and I think it has made us a lot more very conscious and very cautious as well in just how we deal with in just really how what involves mining companies and what we do. Because I think earlier this year we also had something almost similar to we got into a dispute with the Namibia Chamber of Mines over a report that we had published, and they had alleged that the findings that we make, especially around the issue of tax avoidance and tax evasion, were libelous and were false and were quite defamatory to the chamber and to the mining industry. And they had gotten the Ministry of Mines involved in it. They had gotten the minister involved as well, and they were trying to get us to withdraw the report. And this was at around the same time that we First Quantum had just issued their summons against us. So it felt like we were under attack at the time. But like we were able to dispense with the issue with the Chamber of Mines. But I think that those two experiences have, I think, going forward, have really made us, I think, very cautious of how we engage with the companies. And I think, obviously, there's some sense of fear internally into just what we do, how we conduct our work. And I think it makes you overthink everything. I think we overthink everything. We become too cautious. We overanalyze everything. I think it's really daunting to have this huge lawsuit on your back.
Thanks, Martin. Certainly, I think we will all agree that it's very sad and really unnecessary. I'm not too sure if Busi had ended up on after that, maybe Hassan. Busi, did you ever end up?
No, I was perhaps just answering the question that Clark had put, but I had answered in the chat as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Hassan?
Yeah, just my take is the way I see the question is that how does it inform our practice going forward? What are the organizational forms we need to adopt against a powerful adversary who chooses to fragment us, divide us away from our government that we elect into power, right? And moors us in the corner, beats us up when no one's looking. So I think that what we need to do, and there are precedents for this in the women's movement, which used storytelling, consciousness raising, etc., as a clear way, but also in our South African political struggle, where you had a group called the Detainees Parents Support Committee. Now, I hope I'm not showing my age, but in the 80s, the DPSA used to meet in churches like the Methodist Church, where those parents, brothers, sisters, and others who were detained and incarcerated by the police could meet. And I'm sure the examples of Argentina and places like that are quite great, how the mothers of the disappeared could meet. And I really think this could bring together John's initiative with this initiative. If there's a meeting of the victims of this who can meet once a month, now that we discovered Zoom, Jitsi, and other conferencing tools, but there must be a space that we can create when we can meet before we can meet face to face, where we connect those who've been bullied, and the story will not be silenced. That is clearly, we will give each other support, we'll learn from each other, and we'll use it as a basis to attack those who are attacking us. It's a defense, a moral, and a justifiable one.
Thank you very much, Hassan. It really is indeed a moral justified defense. I just want to quickly, Leanne, when you were concluding your remarks, you mentioned this issue of regional and international solidarity, and I don't know, perhaps even Tammy can speak to this because he spoke about the campaign. How would one sort of support this cause if someone is sitting, listening to this discussion, maybe from another country or even locally? How do you support the cause of the Asina Loyiko campaign? How do you join, for example, if you want to be part of this? If either you or Tammy can just speak to that. And there's also been just one part. Sorry, I'm abusing my powers now, but that's the last question from me. Lady, there's this question of psychological support for activists. I don't know if from the research, from the report, whether you can share some of your experiences on how you can offer activist support in this regard. Thanks. So I don't know if Tammy or Leanne, you want to take the question on how one joins the Asina Loyiko campaign.
No, it's fine.
Happy for
I think
Tammy
I'll
to
leave
do
it to
so.
Leanne. We're both deflecting now. No, look, I think it shouldn't be a difficult thing. I mean, clearly right now, what we're identifying is a need for psychosocial support, for instance, right? So that simply means that we need different kinds of expertise in order to be able to expand and build on the base to be able to support, to be able to do, because we also want to do some outreach, in the long term. So for me, it almost feels like we need to widen the net and perhaps for the working group to think critically about how we open up space for other people to bring in the different expertise to enhance, because that's precisely what it's going to do, is to enhance and strengthen the resolve, strengthen the solidarity, open the net for us to be able to essentially have much more skills to be able to assist comrades, wherever they are in the world. So for me, I don't think it should be a technical question. It's almost a question that we need to kind of put together ways and means at which we could be able to accept, different comrades and colleagues from elsewhere who would want to be part of our space, because I think it can only enhance and it can only put us in a better state to be able to have the impactful work that we want to have. And I think the most brilliant thing is none of us is free until all of us are free. And we must always think about the struggles as interconnected, no matter where you are in the world. So I think it's a technical question to say, how does one join? In truth, the question shouldn't be how does one join? In truth is, how do we widen the net so as we're able to open up the space for other comrades to see the necessity to come through and to come together, gather with us, and think about how we deal with the monster of a problem anywhere the issue might suffice.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm just being reminded that we have run out of time. But I see that John's hand is up, and I had asked a lady to just briefly comment on the issue of psychological support. So if people can stay on for those, please do feel free. But those who have to leave, thank you very much for joining. I really, really want to extend our sincere gratitude for you taking the time out to be part of this. And hopefully maybe we can coordinate in future and make sure that this important conversation keeps on happening. But yeah, so the time is up, but those who can stay on for a quick comment from Lady, and then perhaps John, if you want to just say something also. I see your hand has been up for a while. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Manson. Very quickly, something that we have seen in some regions, apart from the importance of having professional support, it's how different organizations are visualizing the cases. They are just sharing stories about slabs. So we really see that in some regions, for instance, in US, there is a coalition called Protect the Protest, where many defenders or environmental activists have shared their stories about slabs. And also in Europe, in the case coalition, people are also sharing their cases. So this is not a professional support, but it's a way to see that people around the world are facing similar problems. And we hear from different defenders that this really helps them, like that they understand that they are not alone in the field, and there are other people that can support with their problems. And I won't answer the Leanne question, but I just wanted to share that something that we also see in the regions, in other regions, is the importance of continue raising awareness. When we think about what we can do in the African region, something that came very like common in other regions is continue raising awareness, but also maybe provide some trainings on how to identify SLAPs, because organizations and defenders still don't know how to identify SLAPs and what they can do when they are facing SLAPs. So in Latin America, for instance, now we are promoting a strategic litigation network where we are also trying to raise awareness about the topic. And 2 weeks ago, we conducted a very quick training on this issue, and we saw that it's important to continue doing that, because lawyers who are representing defenders in the field don't know about the SLAPs. So we see that this is something very, very important, at least from the experience we saw in other regions.
Thanks, lady. John, quickly, please.
Sorry, my wife just started a car, so you heard that vroom behind me. Sorry about that. No, just to say, and it's a good note, hopefully, to inspire people and just feel encouraged further. Firstly, I have written a report to the Zondo Commission when he asked for suggestions on legal reform and what could be done to better protect whistleblowers. And I wrote it very much drawing from my experience working on the Kolobeni mining saga. So I would like to, I'll send the link to that for anybody to read it, because I'd really, would like to see that get traction. And then the last point just to make is that I was actually providing psychosocial support to the Amadiba Crisis Committee, Bazuka Khadebe and Nonse and the rest of them. And I was down there the day before Bazuka was shot and killed. And what I needed was psychosocial support for the psychosocial supporter. And that's why I was saying, Garrett Barnwell, please tell us more, because, it became so burdensome. And fortunately, I got that because I've got resources and privilege and all the rest. And what really concerns me is, I mean, I turned 65 last month, so I should now be retired, but I almost feel like my work's just begun, because I am so excited to see the latent potential that exists out there. And I would just want to encourage folk and say, I'm available to do exactly that, to support people who are finding the experience of having spoken to truth to power, are now having to learn the truth about power, and how power is so kind of viciously geared towards trying every means possible to crush them. But the interesting thing is that the narrative that I'm hearing from all these whistleblower clients is that power ultimately is helpless against it, against the truth. So it's about saying truth, let it be told. So I just want to leave that as a parting shot, and just to say thanks again to everyone.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, colleagues, we have come to the end. We have really went above the allocated time, but we've come to the end of our discussion. As far as the panelists are concerned, we all have our contact details and contact information. So please, let's keep the discussions going, and also just encourage each other to stand in solidarity with organizations like Sarwatch and other organizations who might face similar intimidation from these big corporates. I am unfortunately going to have to close this. I don't know if there's anyone who has anything burning to say. If not, yeah, we really have to shut it down. And thank you very much to our speakers and panelists. Thank you very much to the organizers and the participants in particular. This conversation would not have been possible without you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.